Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning back in once again to Queen Amadai TV presents Beyond the Realm. So as you're coming in, please feel free to go ahead and subscribe to the channel. If you haven't done so, be sure to click the notification bell and click the word all so that you're notified each time I go live on this channel. And also, don't forget to follow me on Instagram at QueenAShakur, on Instagram at divine_goddess_27, Brighton, Patreon, and Melanated People at QueenAShakur, and on Twitter at dgoddess27. Thank you all for returning back to the chat. Let's get into it. The great unsolved mystery of Marjorie West. Now, the search for a little girl who vanished in Pennsylvania in the woods in 1938 captivated people across the U.S., and some people are still looking. So on a damp Thursday morning in May of 1938, hundreds of workers from the Western Pennsylvania oil fields given the day off to look for a missing little girl. She walked through the Allegheny forest at arm's length. This is what they did. I guess they were doing like a grid search. So they traversed the tangled underbrush alongside police who had bloodhounds. There was veterans from the First World War, corn planter Indians, coal miners, and assorted others who had responded to the local mayor's call for 1,000 volunteers. They killed rattlesnakes, and they were careful not to drop a foot. They were careful not to drop a foot down one of the hundreds of oil wells dug during the area's petroleum boom in the 1870s. Now, but by nightfall, the haggard, sleep-robbed faces of scores of men, as the Bradford era newspaper described them, told onlookers the grim truth. Another day had passed without finding the little red-haired girl, 4-year-old Marjorie West. Now, 80 years ago, Marjorie vanished while at a Mother's Day picnic in the forest with her family. To this day, she is the subject of one of the oldest unsolved mystery cases recorded by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Her search was one of the largest for a child since the Lindbergh baby kidnapping 6 years earlier. Residents of Western Pennsylvania and Marjorie's surviving relatives still hold out hope that she's alive. If she is, she may be celebrating her 85th birthday pretty soon. Now, they say she could still be living. This is what Jack Covert, Marjorie's cousin, this is what he said in an interview shortly before he died in March. But she's probably not around here. That's what he said. Marjorie was lost four decades before the nationwide stranger danger panic about kidnapping set off when the son of eventual America's Most Wanted host, John Walsh, disappeared from a Florida mall in 1981. After the much publicized Adam Walsh abduction, parents became much more fearful about where their children went and who they were with. And government agencies instituted safety programs, including taking fingerprints of your kids to keep them on file. Now, more recently, the hit Netflix series Stranger Things, about a fictional 12-year-old named Will Byers, who was snatched into another dimension, prompted renewed discussions about the idyllic times when children roamed free and parents really didn't have to worry. Now, in a New York Times story, Anna North wrote, "Stranger Things is a reminder of a kind of unstructured childhood wondering that now seems less possible. But the Marjorie West case reminds us that decades before this mass media coverage of children's kidnappings, there were hazards about terrified parents and their children coming up missing without a trace. The dangers, Depression-era vagrants, illicit adoption rings, those were all some things that were going on back then, and they were all just so different than is going on now. How free children should be able to roam, and how cautious parents should be about their children's activities is a debate that still rages on today. Now, on Sunday, May the 8th of 1938, the West family, the father Shirley, the mother Cecilia, and children Dorothea, age 11, Alan, age 7, and Marjorie, they all attended church in Bradford, a small city about 90-something miles, 90 minutes south of Buffalo, New York, and 90 minutes east of Titusville, Pennsylvania. And this was the site of the country's first oil boom in 1859. Now, Bradford enjoyed its own rush for liquor, or for liquid gold. I don't know why I said liquor. They enjoyed their own rush for liquid gold a dozen years earlier, providing a steady living for families like the West. Now, Shirley was an assistant engineer at Kendall Refining. After church, the West drove 13 miles around the Highway 219 to a clearing in the Allegheny Forest that was popular for hunters and fishermen at the time. Now, they joined other families and Mr. and Mrs. Lloyd Akerland. They also joined them. Around 3 p.m., Cecilia headed to the road to rest in the car. Now, her husband prepared to go trout fishing in the stream with Lloyd. The girls, Dorothea and Marjorie, wanted to pick wildflowers. Shirley warned them to watch for rattlesnakes behind the boulder nearby. Let me tell you something. I'm sorry, but if I had a child 4 years old and 11, and I got to worry about rattlesnakes, you think I'm going to let them go out there and tell them, hey, just watch out for those rattlesnakes? I mean, I guess children were more mature back then. I don't know, but clearly that's not something I would do. So the girls gathered a bouquet of violets. Dorothea headed to the car to deliver them to their mother. When she turned around, her sister was gone. Now, the family drove to the nearest phone 7 miles away to contact police in the town of Kane. What followed was a grueling search that spanned months and saw more than 3,000 local people hunting for Marjorie, with countless others locked into the national newspaper coverage. When police couldn't find Marjorie that Sunday afternoon, 200 men joined in, including the Citizen Conservation Corps and the Moose and Elks Lodges. And as darkness fell, oil men brought headlamps. They said all available flashlights in the city were pressed into service. The effort slowed when a cold rain fell at 1 a.m. Then on Monday, the search party grew to 500. They waded through a stream and stood 25 yards apart in a mile-long line, ultimately combing four square miles. Now, police interviewed motorists across the area spanning at least 300 square miles. But by Tuesday, May the 10th, police brought bloodhounds from New York State. That evening, they found clues, but accounts vary. 2 newspaper articles say the dogs followed Marjorie's trail half a mile up a mountain to a cabin with its doors nailed shut. Nothing of interest was found inside. Now, other media accounts as well as those from Marjorie's descendants in online blogs and discussion threads, say the dogs followed Marjorie's scent to the road alongside the clearing. Now, the searchers found the crushed bouquet of violets picked by her for Mother's Day. They were just lying on the ground, not far from a rock, close to where the flowers were pulled. This is what Catherine, the daughter of Marjorie's cousin Joyce, this is what she wrote on her genealogy blog in 2006. Now, they say many people believed in 1938, as they still do now, that Marjorie was picked up at the road. Witnesses told the police that 3 cars had passed through the area around 3 p.m. The drivers of 2 were identified by that Tuesday night. The third, whom witnesses said was a man, was seen fleeing in his Plymouth sedan so fast an oncoming motorist told police he had to pull into a ditch. Now, on that Wednesday afternoon, Bradford's mayor, Hugh Ryan, issued his plea for 1,000 volunteers for the next day's search. He ended up getting 2,500. Now, the search was praised for its organization, thanks in part to the men who, like Shirley, had served in the Great War. At around 5:30 a.m., surveyors mapped out the land, and by 8 a.m., a line of men stood shoulder to shoulder, several miles long. They grew impatient in the Chapel Fork Road until leaders gave the bugle signal for them to enter the forest. This is what Era recounted. Now, refinery workers rubbed elbows with professional men. Women dulled at least 1,600 cups of coffee that was prepared in wash boilers from hot laundry or for hot laundry. Now, by the end of the week, the search had covered 35 square miles with Marjorie still out of sight. Hey, Queen, I'm in. Had to refresh like 11 times. Sorry to hear that, beloved. You know how they do. So they say there were discoveries like a swath of lace near the boulder and a fresh hole a few miles away. But Marjorie's aunt told police she hadn't worn lace that day, and 2 men admitted using the hole to hide cask of cherry wine. Say what? So they're supposed to be out here looking for the girl, and they have wine with them, and they're hiding it, mind you. Now, engineers pumped out a muddy well, and Native Americans tracked she-bears, mother bears that believed were prone to carrying off small children to no avail. So they thought maybe the bears had snatched her up. That's what the natives thought. And that could make sense, but the only thing is, when someone have heard her screaming, if that were so. Now, Shirley did not leave the forest for a week until, according to the May 16th edition of the Era, he consented to come to Bradford. He ate his evening meal at home, and then he returned right back out there again to search. Now, police began circulating a poster describing Marjorie's curly red hair, freckles, red Shirley Temple hat, and patent leather shoes. Cecilia West stayed at home so as not to miss a phone call. On May 13th of 1938, the police commissioner, P.W. Foots, told the Associated Press that West's disappearance probably began with her liking to play hide and seek. A detail of 4 police searched the area for 5 months. Now, snakes and bears were not only dangers in the woods, there was other things. Newspapers covering the disappearance linked it with a 1910 mystery in which 2 boys vanished near the forest within a few hours after each other. These are 2 separate incidents. Now, on April the 16th of that year, Edward Adams, age 9, was fishing with his buddies near Lamont, Pennsylvania, and heard a wild man cursing in the woods. The boys ran, but when the group stopped, Eddie was gone. 13 miles away in the town of Ludlow, Michael Steffen, age 7, fished with a friend. Now, walking home, the other boy looked back, and Michael had vanished. Newspapers at the time reported that Mr. Arrowsmith said his mentally unbalanced son, Harry, age 32, had wandered off that same day near Lamont. But Harry returned a week later with no knowledge of the boys, according to police. And 13 days after the disappearances, a mail courier discovered a handwritten note on a Lamont Railroad trestle. It said, "Will return boy for $10,000. That was the last clue that was ever found. So 2 years later, Buffalo police captured the postcard killer, whose name was J. Frank Hickey, who admitted to murdering the 2 other boys in Buffalo and Manhattan 9 years apart. Many suspected he had killed the other boys in the region, and Edward Adams's mother wrote to Buffalo police to ask whether Hickey ever mentioned her son. When Mrs. Adams died in 1933, the Associated Press reported that she'd kept a light in her window for 23 years, waiting on her son Eddie to come home. Those disappearances were 11 and 19 miles from where Marjorie's picnic, respectively, had occurred. Now, it's hard to believe the same wild man could have been lurking in the woods 28 years later. But the cases were a testament to the fact that anyone could have been in the forest. In fact, the Era reported on September the 14th of 1938 that a 55-year-old woodsman was arrested for assaulting another man with a double-bladed axe during an argument while they were working on a woods operation in the Chapel Fork area. This was near the place where Marjorie actually disappeared. Now, the story said that the woodsman had been questioned about Marjorie at one point, but then he was released. Now, if Marjorie was snatched, it could have been for profit, perhaps, but during the Great Depression, child kidnappings became so popular. It was a low-tech way to make a buck. Kidnapping wave sweeps the nation. That's what the New York Times headline read on March 3rd of 1932, 2 days after the abduction of the son of an aviator, Charles Lindbergh. At the time, some feared that cars, still a relatively new technology back then, were going to cause an increase in kidnappings, and they weren't wrong. Abductions did increase with the use of automobiles and with greater highway usage. Still, many of those who believed Marjorie was abducted thought it was not for ransom, but for a different type of money-making enterprise. I wonder what kind of enterprise they thought that was, because they clearly don't say. Now, on September the 12th of 1950, Tennessee authorities announced allegations that Georgia Tann, the executive director of the Memphis branch of the Tennessee Children's Home Society, had adopted out more than 1,000 babies for $1 million since the 1930s, tricking poor couples into giving them up. I remember this story. This lady was so nefarious. She was getting poor people to just give away their kids, telling them all these lies and everything. Now, Tann died 3 days after the investigation was made public. Many of the children never knew their parents, including famed professional wrestler Ric Flair. He was one of them, born in 1949. He wrote about his circumstances in an autobiography, and presumably the wealthy clients who adopted them through Tann's agency, including actress Joan Crawford from Mommy Dearest, never knew of her methods. Oh, they knew. They knew. I'm sure they knew. These rich people, the elite, just like they still kidnap people's children and still, take people's children, all that. Let me tell you something. I think they knew, these rich people, they didn't want to go through a legit adoption because some of them were treating these kids quite, bad or poorly, shall I say. Because we all know about Joan Crawford, how she treated those kids. If you all saw the movie Mommy Dearest or read the book. So I think they knew. I think they just, went along with it because they wanted those kids. So anyway, they go on to say the Tann theory was bolstered by a clue. A few days after Marjorie disappeared, a taxi driver in Thomas, West Virginia, told police that late at night on Mother's Day, a man and weeping young girl checked into the town's Imperial Hotel, said they could have been stopping midway to Tennessee. But news stories from 5 months later rendered that Tann theory unlikely. In October of 1938, Pennsylvania State Police tracked down merchant Conrad Fridley of Ridgely, West Virginia. Now, he said that on that evening, he and his daughter Lois, age 5, were returning home from a visit at Parsons, West Virginia, and that they had stopped because of the fog. Lois became frustrated and cried. They left the hotel early the next morning to open his shop. So that wasn't little Marjorie West. That was a man and his daughter, and they stopped on their way back home because of the fog. Now, census records from the 1940s show a Conrad Fridley, age 31, of Ridgely, who in 1940 did have a daughter who was 8. So apparently he wasn't lying. Now, as spring turned to summer, national media focused on Hitler's annexation of Austria and the suffering of the United States economy. But Western Pennsylvania's press continued following Marjorie's case. They say the state police investigation continued off and on for 6 years. Reportedly, this is what was reported by the Era in 1955, noting that Shirley and Cecilia West had separated around 1953. Family members say Marjorie's closest relatives went to her grave believing she was still alive, or they went to their grave believing she was still alive. So that is all so crazy, right? All so crazy. Now they say Tammy Dittman, a longtime teacher in Bradford, took a class of hers to the Allegheny Forest in 2008 to learn about archaeology. During the trip, 2 men from the Civil War Conservation Corps discussed their search as youths for Marjorie West. They said they talked about how hard they had searched. They searched shoulder to shoulder constantly. Now, the class undertook a project to research the case and speak with young kids about safety. After the Olean Times Herald covered the project, Dittman got a call from an elderly man who was now blind, who had searched as well. The old man, Dittman said, there was no way the little girl, this is what the old man said now. He said there was no way the little girl could have been in the woods. The fact that he contradicted me, the fact that he contacted me practically on his deathbed shows how sad it was. Maybe he had a little hope that we'd find out more. But Didma says, Didma, who has hiked near Chapel Fork, acknowledged the hazards nearby, including hundreds of oil wells that are hard to notice. You can step right into them and go straight down, she said. Yet she believes the most likely explanation is that Marjorie was kidnapped. She says, I hope she was at least with a good family. Honey, if somebody's going around kidnapping kids, they're hardly a good family, okay? Now, two of Marjorie's descendants have written online about the case. Catherine, the daughter of Marjorie's first cousin, Joyce, explained on her family genealogy blog. She said, my grandfather searched for weeks, long after the manhunt was called off, returning home late into the night. 3 small children sat on the porch steps waiting for him, but they knew each night from the slope of his shoulders that he didn't find the little girl with the bouncing red curls. The granddaughter of Dorothea West, Angel, wrote in 2009, she said, I remember listening to my grandmother tell stories about Marjorie and the sadness that she felt for leaving her sisters alone for those few moments. My grandmother held on to her feeling, or to that feeling of responsibility, until she passed a few years ago. These 3 descendants of Marjorie did not respond to requests for interviews. So out of respect for their privacy, we've opted not only to use their first names, However, we did contact authorities back in 2010, compelling the state police, unable to find old records, to start a new case file. Corporal Mary Gossman said that in 2012, state police took cheek swabs of DNA from 2 cousins in Bradford, sending them to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Unfortunately, that didn't produce any clues. Both agencies get tips. Gossman said that in 2014, an employee of a hospital in Rochester, New York, read about the case online and called to say that he had a patient named Marjorie who rarely had any visitors, but the woman's niece had seen immigration records and confirmed that she was born in 1922. However, one Bradford native believes he knows the story. He knows the answer to the mystery. Harold Thomas Beck, known as Bud, a writer and recounter, and a college professor with a PhD in linguistics, researched the case after he heard about it at a bar that he used to run. Now, around 1998, when internet access was becoming more widespread, he posted a $10,000 reward for information about Marjorie. He included up-to-date photos of Dorothea, figuring Marjorie would resemble her. That was her sister. Now, one woman contacted him to say that she'd worked at a company in Florida with a nurse who looked very similar. Beck took a trip south to meet several people about whom he gotten tips. The nurse did look a lot like Dorothea, but denied being Marjorie. And then around 2005, Beck says he heard from her again and went on to meet her. By then, she had returned to her childhood farm in North Carolina. When he caught up with her there, she related a story that her mother had told her when she was nearing the end of her life in 1938, or where she was near the end of her life. She said in 1938, the nurse's father left that very farm and drove north to work in Bradford's refineries for the winter. Come spring, it was time to return to his crops. Now, driving south past the Allegheny Forest on Mother's Day, he hits a little girl. Said he hit her, ran over her. There wasn't anybody there, Beck recounts. He was going to take her to the hospital in Kane. He was afraid she was dead, though. But as he was driving with the unconscious girl in the car, she woke up seemingly unharmed. He and his wife had lost their only daughter that winter. The delivery had been difficult, and they didn't think they could have more children. The man brought Marjorie to the farm and raised her there. What? Now, a few years later, he lost an arm on board an aircraft carrier in the Second World War. The man told his wife he thought it was God's way of punishing him for what he had done. The nurse used to tell her parents that she remembered another family, but they dismissed it. She also remembered a place with snowway snow all the way over her head. After the Second World War, her parents had 4 more children, according to Beck. Now, the nurse told Beck that the story after he made 2 promises the nurse told Beck the story after he made 2 promises. The first one was he couldn't tell anyone about her identity except for Dorothea, whom she wanted to meet. And 2, Beck could only publish her story after she died. By that time, Dorothea was in ill health and couldn't meet Marjorie. The nurse died about a decade ago. Beck kept his promise and self-published Finding Marjorie West in 2010. There's no question it's her, he says. Now, people have pressed him to notify the authorities, but he ponders, what is it going to accomplish? One family is dead, and the other has been living under a set of circumstances they believe to be true. The mother and father were considered good people in the community. Now, I want y'all to pay attention. That's called staying on code. Now, this lady told him all of this, and they pressured him to go to the authorities. He said, what good is it going to do? One family's dead, and the other ones, who likely kidnapped the little girl, if it was true, well, they were known as good people. So he didn't want to ruin their legacy. Pay attention. So he wasn't going to say a word. Clearly on code. Said they were considered good people in the community. So he couldn't tell anybody that they hit a child, thought she was dead, and then just kept her for themselves. So locals who've read the book have debated its conclusions on Facebook. Marjorie's cousin's daughter, Catherine, discounted the story on a 2012 discussion thread on websleuths.com, a site on which people tried to solve missing persons cases. Now, Catherine wrote that the state trooper she talked to didn't take Beck's narrative seriously. Beck says he understands why people get frustrated, particularly those involved in the search, but he won't betray a confidence. Bob Lowry, a vice president at the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, hasn't heard of Beck's book, but says Beck or anyone else with information about Marjorie should come forward. He notes the case is the 3rd oldest in their files. He says, I would think that anyone alive today who was living at the time would have vivid memories of this. When something happens to a child of 4, there's a need to have the truth, to have it shared so that everyone knows what happened. Now, if Beck's tale is true, it would explain how Marjorie disappeared so quickly and without a trace, as well as the speeding Plymouth. But the story begs questions. How were 2 people able to keep the secret so long? And did the sorrow they felt on Mother's Day drive them to rationalize their acts? Now, perhaps the tale is just too good to be true. In Beck's book, the nurse claims she was the sobbing girl spotted in West Virginia on Mother's Day nights. But according to an article from October of 1938, the police in West went to meet Conrad Fridley, the merchant, who said that he was there. So police told the press that his daughter resembled Marjorie, but it wasn't her, and the girl spotted that night had a different type of clothing on than Marjorie. Beck simply dismissed the newspaper accounts, saying he stands by his story. Now, relatives remain wary, and in 2015, an anonymous reviewer on Amazon, presumably a member of the family, wrote that she was shocked Beck was still selling the book after making false promises and leading my grandmother on a wild goose chase for years. So what if the nurse wasn't Marjorie? Where did she go? One cannot discount the rough terrain in the woods. And in 1962, 2 boys died while exploring an abandoned clay mine in western Pennsylvania. That prompted Bradford officials to finally start closing all those old mines, caves, and wells. Whew, and that was crazy. That was crazy. Good people being kidnappers, killers, racists, etc., says Smoketown for life. Right. Doing all of that. Sweet Pea says, yep, code in full effect. Absolutely. B. Dilla says exactly. TJ said, good people, they're kidnappers. Okay? These. Oh, well, that was interesting, people. That was really interesting. And mind you, I had never heard that story until today. So that was real interesting. So now, The last story is called Maybe You'll Remember, and it's kind of spooky. So with that all being said, everyone, please like and share the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so. Be sure to click the notification bell and click the word all so that you're notified each time the Queen Goddess goes live. I'm going to go ahead and come right into the next story because we're already late. It was supposed to start at 7:40, all right? So see you all in the next chat.